Victoria Hale's office stood like an impenetrable fortress, every inch of it a statement of her power and control. At 32, she had already conquered the corporate world, her name synonymous with success. But behind the glass walls of Hale Tech's executive floor, where the city sprawled beneath her gaze, there was a growing emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. She clicked her heels sharply against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the vast space. As her gaze remained fixed on the man in front of her, Ethan Cole, the janitor, stood motionless, his hands holding a cardboard box filled with his few personal belongings, his daughter's picture, a small mug from his late wife. "I'm sorry, Ethan. You're done here. Get out of my building." Victoria's voice was cold, cutting through the air like a blade. Ethan didn't flinch. His heart ached, but it wasn't anger that burned his chest. It was something deeper, disappointment, frustration. The world didn't see him. They never had, not for who he really was. Only the man who mopped floors, who cleaned up after people in suits. Behind the glass partition, his daughter Lily, just 8 years old, stood frozen. Her tiny hands pressed against the cool glass as she watched him. Confusion filled her big eyes as she whispered, "Mommy, why did you fire him?" Victoria's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. Her gaze flicked from Ethan to the little girl standing behind the glass, her innocence and purity cutting to the icy exterior of the corporate world she lived in. "He saved my life." Lily's soft voice echoed through the room, thick with truth. The words hit Victoria harder than she expected. She felt a knot form in her chest, a reminder of the distance she had created between herself and everything that mattered. She turned away, not knowing what to say, what to feel. In her mind, Ethan was just a janitor, a man who didn't belong in her world. But something in her heart was starting to shift. Ethan walked out without a word, the weight of Lily's gaze burning into his back. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. His daughter was the only reason he was still standing. 2 months earlier, Ethan's life had been predictable, almost mechanical in its rhythm. Every morning at 5 a.m., he rose from the cramped bed in his small apartment in Queens. The sound of traffic below, the occasional bark of a dog from a nearby neighbor, and the soft hum of the radiator had been a symphony, familiar and comforting. His world was small, but for him, it was enough. His daughter, Lily, was the center of everything. She was his reason for waking up every day, and the one thing in his life that kept him going. Ethan's mornings always began the same way, carefully stepping around the clutter in the tiny apartment to avoid waking Lily. She slept in the corner of the room in a makeshift bed, tucked under a worn quilt. He didn't dream anymore. He couldn't afford to. His life had become about survival, about getting by day to day, to keep her safe, fed, and happy. Every dollar he earned, every hour he worked as a janitor at Hale Tech, was dedicated to her. It wasn't much, but it was all he could give. He never talked about his past. His life before Lily felt like a different world, a world that he didn't belong to anymore. He had been a combat medic, a soldier who had saved countless lives on foreign soil. The things he had witnessed, the horrors he had lived through, were things he could never talk about. Losing his wife during childbirth had shattered him, left him a broken man. But Lily had been his salvation. She had given him purpose again, and he was determined to be the best father he could be. Victoria Hale's life was the antithesis of Ethan's. The sprawling penthouse that she called home overlooked Central Park, a luxurious symbol of her success. At 32, she was one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in the city. Her company, Hale Tech, was a technological powerhouse, and she had inherited it after the sudden death of her husband 3 years ago. The grief had hardened her. The man who had been her partner in everything was gone, and she was left to pick up the pieces of their shared empire. Victoria had thrown herself into work, burying her emotions beneath the weight of her responsibilities. She couldn't afford to mourn for long. She had to be strong, to prove herself. But the longer she stayed in control, the more distant she became. Her daughter, Ella, was a shadow of herself. At just 7 years old, Ella had already learned to shut herself off from the world. Her quiet demeanor, her fearful eyes, and her constant withdrawal from those around her were all signs of something that Victoria had ignored for too long. She blamed herself for not being there for her, for failing to be the mother Ella needed. But there was nothing she could do. Work had become her refuge, her excuse. It kept her mind busy, kept her from facing the painful reality that her daughter was slipping away from her, silently begging for her attention and love. The moment their worlds collided was nothing spectacular. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Ethan had come in early to cover for a co-worker. He was replacing a broken light bulb in the maintenance corridor when he heard it, a soft, trembling cry, a child's voice. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and without hesitation, he dropped his tools and rushed to the elevator bank. The service elevator was stuck between floors, smoke billowing from the gap, and his heart pounded in his chest as he pulled at the door, his muscles straining under pressure. Inside, he saw a small figure huddled in the corner. The child was terrified, her wide eyes frozen in fear. Without thinking, Ethan wedged his hands into the gap in the elevator door, using all his strength to pry it open. The metal groaned, but it gave way. He pulled the girl into his arms, carrying her to safety as the alarms blared and the building staff rushed in. Then Victoria appeared, her heels clicking sharply against the tiles as she stormed into the scene. Her eyes were filled with fury and fear. "What did you do to my daughter?" she demanded, her voice like ice. Ethan, still holding the girl, stepped back. "I saved her," he said quietly. "She was trapped. I got her out." Victoria's gaze hardened, narrowing. "You're just a janitor. You don't have the right to do this." For a brief moment, their eyes locked. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, his gaze steady. He didn't need her to acknowledge him. He had done what was right. But Victoria wasn't finished. She didn't thank him. She didn't apologize. She took her daughter from his arms and walked away, leaving Ethan alone in the hallway, the weight of her judgment hanging in the air. The story began to twist in ways that neither Ethan nor Victoria had anticipated. The whispers started almost immediately. Ethan had tampered with the elevator. He had endangered her daughter's life. But when Victoria reviewed the security footage, her heart sank. It didn't show a man tampering with the elevator. It showed Ethan pulling her daughter from the elevator, holding her in his arms, and risking his own life to save her. She had been wrong. Her assumptions had clouded her judgment. Ethan hadn't caused a malfunction. He had saved Ella. Victoria felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had dismissed him so quickly, and for what? Because he was a janitor? Because he didn't belong in her world? Her pride had led her to make a hasty decision, a decision that she couldn't undo. Victoria knew she had to make things right. The next morning, she left the comforts of her penthouse and traveled to Ethan's apartment. Her mind raced with what to say. How could she apologize for judging him so harshly, for dismissing his actions without truly understanding them? When she arrived, Ethan was surprised to see her at his door. She was standing there, her posture a little softer, her eyes filled with guilt. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "You saved my daughter. You didn't deserve what I did. I'm sorry." The apology was sincere, but it was also a first step towards something more. Victoria wasn't just apologizing to Ethan. She was apologizing to herself for the person she had become, and for the first time in a long while, she felt vulnerable. Ethan didn't say much in response. His eyes softened as he looked at her. He didn't need her apology. He just needed her to see him for who he was, a man who had risked his life to save hers. And in that moment, something shifted. something neither of them had been expecting. As the days passed, Victoria and Ethan began to see each other differently. Victoria's walls began to crack. She saw Ethan not just as a janitor, but as a man of strength of character. He had saved her daughter's life. He had done what she, in her cold, distant way, hadn't been able to do for Ella. And Ethan began to see Victoria in a new light. She wasn't just a ruthless CEO who had fired him. She was a woman who had lost so much, a woman who had forgotten how to live with love and humility. He could see the pain behind her icy demeanor, and for the first time, he understood her. They began to work together on a foundation project for child safety, something that allowed them to collaborate, to bridge the gap between them. Slowly, their partnership turned into something more. The chemistry between them was undeniable. The passion that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. In the quiet moments they shared, the lingering glances, the soft touches, their connection deepened. The turning point came when Victoria invited Ethan to her private office at Hale Tech. The large glass windows that overlooked the city skyline felt like a distant world. Inside, however, the atmosphere between them was thick with unspoken words, lingering desire and raw emotions. Victoria had spent the last few weeks reflecting on everything that had happened, and as she sat across from Ethan, she realized how much had shifted. She no longer saw him as just a janitor. He had become someone essential in her life, someone who had shown her the humanity she had long neglected. Her heart raced as she looked at him, seated casually in a chair, his strong hands resting on his knees. Ethan's quiet confidence made her feel vulnerable in ways she wasn't accustomed to. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than usual, "about everything, about what you did, and about me. I owe you more than just an apology." Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done." Victoria shook her head, her heart aching as she reached for his hand across the table. His fingers were calloused, rough from years of hard work. But when their skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot through her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she held on to him tightly, her gaze never leaving his. "You're wrong," she whispered. "Not everyone would have done it. Not like you did." His eyes softened. There was a hint of something in his expression, something deep, something that had been buried for too long. And then, without thinking, she leaned in closer. She could feel the warmth of his breath, could almost taste the desire that hung between them. Her heart pounded as she crossed the invisible line between them, moving past the walls they had built. Their lips met softly at first, a tentative exploration that quickly turned into something more urgent, more primal. Ethan's hand cupped the back of her neck, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. His tongue brushed against hers, and Victoria's body reacted before her mind could process the intensity of the moment. Every touch, every caress was an unraveling. The passion that had been building between them since their first encounter burst through the cracks, consuming them both. Victoria pulled away only slightly, her breath ragged. She looked into Ethan's eyes, searching for any hesitation. But there was none. "I've been living a lie," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so focused on my success, on being in control, that I forgot what it means to truly live, to truly feel." Ethan's thumb gently brushed her cheek, his touch tender and understanding. "We're both broken in our own ways," he said quietly, "but we can fix each other, if we're willing to try." Victoria nodded, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. She had spent so much time building walls, creating barriers to protect herself from the world, from pain. But in Ethan's arms, all of that seemed to fall away. She wasn't the CEO of Hale Tech. She wasn't a woman hiding behind her power. She was just a woman who had finally allowed herself to be seen. The next few days were a blur of intense emotional and physical connection. Ethan and Victoria spent hours together, working, talking, and sharing quiet, intimate moments. But it wasn't just about the physical intimacy. It was the emotional bond that had started to take root between them. At work, their professional partnership began to evolve into something deeper. Their shared commitment to the foundation project brought them closer. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but it was the emotional vulnerability they shared that truly sealed their connection. In their private moments, the desire that simmered between them was palpable. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Victoria's penthouse, the city lights flickering below them, Ethan turned to her. "I never thought I'd be here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought a man like me would get a chance with someone like you." Victoria smiled softly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You've always had a chance. I just couldn't see it." She leaned in again, this time with a sense of certainty. Their lips met with an intensity that left them both breathless, their connection undeniable. As their kiss deepened, they pulled each other closer, letting the world outside fade away. The air between them crackled with energy, with desire that was impossible to ignore. The night of the charity gala marked the pinnacle of their emotional and physical connection. Victoria had invited Ethan as her guest, wanted to show him just how much he had come to mean to her. But the evening held more than just the glitz and glamour of the event. As they entered the grand hall together, their chemistry was electric. Victoria, in a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, couldn't take her eyes off Ethan, who wore a tailored suit that made him look every bit the man he was. Strong, confident, and undeniably handsome. But it wasn't just the way they looked together. It was the way they felt. Their connection was palpable, undeniable. Throughout the evening, the tension between them built, the physical chemistry simmering beneath the surface. They shared private glances, subtle touches, and whispered words that no one else could hear. But when the evening came to a close and they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the venue, the attraction finally erupted. Victoria pulled Ethan close, her hands threading through his hair as she kissed him with an urgency that shocked them both. Their bodies pressed together, a heated rush of desire that only grew stronger with every kiss. The sound of their breathing, the weight of their longing, filled the space between them. As they found themselves in a private room, the intensity of their connection reached a fever pitch. Clothes were shed, emotions were laid bare, and for the first time in years, Victoria allowed herself to feel everything: the love, the passion, the vulnerability. Ethan's touch was gentle yet assertive, making her feel desired in ways she had never allowed herself to be before. Their bodies moved together in a rhythm that felt both tender and urgent, as if they were making up for all the years of loneliness and emotional distance. Each kiss, each touch, was an expression of everything they had shared and everything they had yet to discover about each other. The morning after the gala, everything had changed. Victoria and Ethan had crossed a threshold that neither of them could go back from. But this wasn't just about the physical connection. It was about the emotional bond they had built, one that was stronger than any wall either of them had ever erected. As they sat together on the balcony once more, watching the sun rise over the city, Victoria took Ethan's hand in hers. "This is real, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "Yeah, this is real." They didn't need words to express the depth of what they had. They simply sat together, enjoying the quiet, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning after the gala, Victoria and Ethan found themselves sitting in the stillness of her penthouse, the weight of the night's events heavy on their hearts. The sunlight crept slowly through the windows, casting a soft golden hue over the room. But the quiet that had settled between them was far from peaceful. It was filled with the ghosts of emotions they had yet to process, the overwhelming desire, the tenderness that lingered, and the complex web of vulnerability and love that now tied them together. Victoria, her body still warm from Ethan's touch, looked out over the city. Her thoughts, like the sun's rays, slowly began to make their way to him. Ethan, the man who had unknowingly penetrated the armor she had spent years building around herself. The man who had saved her daughter, and, in doing so, had saved her too. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ethan's quiet voice, low and steady. "Victoria, we need to talk." She turned to him, her chest tightening. She wasn't sure she was ready for this conversation. What did it mean to go from just a CEO and a janitor to something more? The stark contrast between their worlds, the cold, polished halls of her empire and the worn, humble corners of his life, had always been there. But now it seemed a blur, fading into something deeper, something more intimate. "I know," she whispered, her heart racing. The uncertainty in her voice reflected the chaos in her chest. "But I don't know what to say. After last night, after everything, I just don't know how we move forward." The vulnerability in her words cut through Ethan deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. He had saved her daughter's life, yes, but now he was standing at the edge of something far more dangerous, his own heart. He had never allowed himself to be vulnerable in this way, never allowed himself to be seen for who he truly was. Not just a janitor, not just a man who kept his head down and worked for survival. He had been hiding from the world for years, locked behind walls of self-reliance and silence. But with Victoria, everything had changed. She had seen him, really seen him, and in return, he had begun to see her too. And yet, here they were, two people who had crossed an invisible line, who had shared something intimate, raw, and real. But could it survive the weight of their pasts? Could they face the stark truth of who they were? Or was this just a fleeting moment of passion that would soon fade into nothingness? "I don't know either," Ethan confessed, his voice trembling slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "But I can't pretend that what happened last night doesn't mean something." His words hit her like a wave, crashing into her chest. She had felt the same. She had tried to push it aside, but the truth was undeniable. There was something between them now, something that could never be erased. "You're right," she whispered, the raw honesty in her voice cutting through the air. "Last night meant everything to me. But it's so complicated, Ethan. My life, my world, everything I've built, I don't know how to fit you into it." The tension between them intensified, and the room felt smaller. It wasn't just about their physical closeness, but the emotional distance that seemed to grow with every passing second. The stakes were high now. The feelings they had shared, the moments of tenderness and heat, had opened doors neither of them had expected to open. But Victoria wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. She needed time to process, to understand what this meant. Could she really allow herself to love him? To let him into her world, where everything was structured and controlled? Ethan, sensing the wall between them, took a deep breath. The emotions that swirled inside him were a storm he could no longer contain. His heart, which had been sealed for so long, was now wide open. He couldn't pull back, not now. He wasn't going to run away from this. "I don't need you to fix everything," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "I just need you to be here with me. To see me for who I am, not the man you think I am. Not the janitor, not the hero. Just me." His words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, like a confession that had been buried for far too long. And it struck something deep inside Victoria, something she had tried to ignore for years. The fear of letting go, of trusting someone enough to let them in. She was a CEO. She had built an empire. But when it came to matters of the heart, she felt like a stranger in her own life. "I don't know how to let you in," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long building walls around me, keeping everyone out, that I don't know how to do this with you." The silence between them was deafening. The emotional weight hung heavy in the room. Neither of them knew where to go from here. But as their eyes locked, something shifted. Their hearts beat in sync, a silent understanding passing between them. The air between them became thick with unspoken desires. The tension that had been building between them since the first moment they had met was now impossible to ignore. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Ethan reached out and took Victoria's hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. It was a question, a plea, a silent invitation to trust him, to step into something new and unfamiliar. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat of his touch, the raw intensity in his eyes. It was like a magnet pulling her toward him, erasing every doubt she had. She didn't need to say anything. She just needed to feel. Their lips met again, this time with an intensity that left them both breathless. The kiss deepened, their bodies pressing closer, as if they couldn't get close enough. Ethan's hands roamed across her back, pulling her closer, while Victoria tangled her fingers in his hair, tugging him toward her with an urgency that surprised them both. The connection between them was electric, raw, and untamed. Every touch, every caress, felt like a spark that ignited something deep inside her. She had been so careful for so long, but with Ethan, she felt free. Free to be vulnerable. Free to feel. As their bodies came together, the world outside seemed to disappear. There were no more barriers, no more walls. There was just the heat of their skin, the rhythm of their hearts, and the intoxicating sensation of their connection. As the night wore on, they found themselves tangled in the sheets, their bodies moving together in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each kiss, each touch, was a declaration of their longing. Ethan's hands traced the curve of Victoria's back, his fingers grazing over the smoothness of her skin, as if he was memorizing every inch of her. Her body responded to him instinctively, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But it wasn't just about the physical. It was the way they had connected on a deeper level, the way their souls seemed to merge, the way they had shared their vulnerabilities and fears. Every moment with him felt like a release, a letting go of the pain and walls she had built around herself. For Ethan, it was the first time he allowed himself to feel anything other than duty. For so long, he had buried his emotions, focusing only on Lillian's survival. But with Victoria, he could let go. With her, he could finally be whole again. The emotional highs were overwhelming, but so were the lows. They each had their own battles. Victoria's fear of letting go, Ethan's struggle with his past. But together, they found something they had both been searching for: love, acceptance, healing. In the early hours of the morning, they lay in each other's arms, the soft glow of dawn streaming through the windows. The world outside was just beginning to wake, but in that moment, time stood still. Victoria rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had never felt so safe, so at peace. The walls she had spent so long building were now gone, replaced by something far stronger: trust. "I think I'm finally ready," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan looked down at her, his heart swelling with love. "Ready for what?" "For us. For whatever comes next," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm ready to face it with you." The words hung in the air, a promise, a new beginning. And in that moment, they both knew they had found something real, something worth fighting for.